I want to take you back about 2 years when I was in a high school auditorium and 300 kids marched in to take their seats. And I have to tell you, I love talking about the principles of freedom. I love talking about the Constitution. I love talking about American history. And as I watched these kids come in, these administrators, these teachers were absolutely on edge because they had come to me and asked me to do several assemblies with 300 students at a time in 2-hour time slots. And I was going to spend 2 days there and literally reach out to every single student in that school. But the administration was absolutely on edge, not sure that I could actually do what I told them that I was going to do. What was my job? It was simply to teach these kids about our country, what it means to be an American, how our Constitution protects us, and why it should matter. It was really that simple. And in their mind, the administration, there was no way that someone could hold the attention of several hundred high school students for a 2-hour time period while talking about the Constitution. That's fair. It's absolutely fair. I mean, even older folks have a hard time believing that their attention span can be held together for a 2-hour time slot talking about the Constitution, so I get it. The adrenaline was even more intense for me, though, because I knew that the administration didn't believe it could be done, and then we got started. Before I even took the stage, I want you to imagine for just a moment, 16, 17-year-old kids filled this auditorium, and before I even take the stage, every breath you take by the police takes over the sound system. And it played to a montage of pictures of America, our reality, our problems, our victories. And when the music died down, there were 16, 17-year-old kids in that auditorium that had tears in their eyes. They had begun to experience just a glimpse of what I wanted them to experience, and I hadn't even taken the stage. But the bottom line is, 5 minutes into this thing, the administration and their attitude, from my perspective, had been defeated, and I hadn't even taken the stage yet. It was that simple. And then I pulled 2 students from the audience up onto the stage. And I simply engaged them in a scenario about how they were driving home one evening and the police pulls them over and the police want their license and their registration. And then, of course, as the scenario goes, we got to make it interesting, the police want to search your car. And you want to see a debate break out. Tell kids that police are going to pull them over, and now there's going to be a question come to the forefront where they are going to be asked whether or not law enforcement can search your car. And next thing you know, these kids are debating back and forth. Some have the perspective of, why wouldn't I let them search my car? I have nothing to hide. And then other students literally rising up and saying, why would I let them do this? It's my right to be left alone. And we're talking about, of course, this is a Fourth Amendment issue. But we spent 2 hours talking about the Second Amendment. We talked about the First Amendment and the freedom of speech. We talked about free enterprise. We talked about issues of power and why it's important to separate power and making it relevant to them. And these students debated one another for nearly 2 hours. Teachers were debating with their own students. Teachers were debating with other teachers inside this auditorium of what I should make very clear, it was a public school. A public school. This was a public high school right here in Arizona. And then after I finished up, after that 2 hour time frame, I simply left them with the following message. America needs you. You only have one life to live, and there are no do-overs. When you hit 60, 70, 80 years old, you don't get to stand up and say, you know what, I want to try this thing all over again. There are no do-overs. Dedicate your life to something bigger than yourself. And when I finished with these 300 students, this first group that I had, These kids gave me a standing ovation. Now, I don't tell you about the standing ovation, although it made me feel incredibly good, to tell you about what a great job I thought I did. That's not why I tell you that. I tell you that because these kids care. And when you convey information to them that is relevant to their personal lives, and you allow them to understand that these principles that we spent 2 hours talking about will impact nearly everything that they do in their life, that's important to them. And they appreciate those things. The administration, it goes without being said, stood in awe. And this was my thought. Nobody has ever stood up in front of these kids inside of a public school who really cared themselves about the subject matter. And I know that's a pretty harsh statement, but I can only tell you that that is my own experience. That is purely anecdotal. But I have made hundreds of appearances in public schools all over this country. And I have come to the conclusion that most of these kids have only experienced other educators standing in front of them, teaching them about something that the educator themselves wasn't very passionate about. They just weren't. And so these kids leave our public schools with a lot of misconceptions about what it means to be an American, what it means to live under a constitution such as ours. And then what sealed the deal for me, and this has happened many times, is an administrator approaching and saying, what do you suggest? What do we need to do differently? And I think we all know the answer when we're talking about young kids from kindergarten up to 12th grade and even into the college years of these students. It's got to be hip, wow, and now. That's the bottom line. You have to teach this topic as though it means something to their lives right now. It's got to be hip, wow, and now. That's the bottom line. We've got to make it relevant.